welcome back to Anna Rose Reads the podcast. I am your host, Anna, and this week I have a different kind of interview. I am interviewing graphic novelist Anna Meyer about her debut novel, St. Catherine. It is a gorgeous, stunning graphic novel. And this is the first time that I actually speak to a full time graphic novelist, so it was a very cool interview. If you know me a little bit, you know I'm a little bit into art. I dabble here and there, so kind of getting to marry my two special interests of artwork creation and fiction creation with Anna was super, super cool. Not to mention, St. Catherine is a story that is near and dear to my heart. If you are a fan of CJ Leeds' American Rapture, I highly recommend picking up this graphic novel. It touches on similar themes around organized religion and wrestling with your demons related to religion or faith. Is a really, really cool read. It's really beautiful. I can't wait to actually have a print copy in my hands. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to share this one with you all. I hope that you all enjoy it, and I'll talk to you guys after. Hi, Anna. How are you?
I'm good, Anna. How are you?
I'm doing so well. I am so excited for you because we are chatting the Sunday before the release of your graphic novel, St. Catherine.
Yeah.
Um, and I absolutely adore this graphic novel for numerous reasons that we'll chat about. But if people don't know who you are and don't know about St. Catherine, do you just kind of want to introduce the graphic novel and yourself?
Yeah. I'll start with the graphic novel. So it's called St. Catherine. And St. Catherine, it's a modern day story. It takes place in New York City, and it's about a girl in her mid-20s. And she grew up in a very religious household, and she's off on her own. She doesn't really subscribe to that religion anymore, that religion being Catholicism, but she is still very superstitious. And she has this one superstition that she has to go to Mass every Sunday because she's never missed it. She's never missed a Sunday Mass in all her 25 years of life, because she thinks something bad will happen. And then one day, the powers that be happen, and she misses Mass, and she finds out that she's possessed by a demon, actually, an entire legion of demons. And so the graphic novel follows her trying to deal with this fact that she's possessed by a legion of demons, but also dealing with her relationships, her family issues, work stuff, and all those things. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it is a lovely, lovely graphic novel. It is gorgeous as well. But this is your debut, correct?
it is my debut, yeah.
Okay, so do you want to talk a little bit about like the debut experience and like what is your prior background to this and like your relationship to writing, creating, illustration, all that good stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I have always, ever since I was little, I've always loved making up stories, just had like a bunch of imaginary friends and things like that. I think I was always very drawn to the fantastical, the whimsical. And so I was always drawing, I was always writing. I almost feel like my love of drawing came from I had all these stories in my head that I wanted to see become real. And so I picked up drawing, and my mom was really great about facilitating art and creativity and me and all my siblings. So I was just drawing a lot, writing a lot, but I was very shy about it and very secretive. So I kept a lot of that to myself. But when I found the online community of like deviant art and different art communities, I started, and I found web comics as well, which is basically people posting comics that they draw online for people to read. They're usually free, which is really great. And so I started reading web comics. I started writing my own web comics. I had one that I was working on in high school, and then I had one I was working on in college. Neither of them neither of them finished, which is a very classic webcomic thing. But I always wanted to make my own story and create a graphic novel or a comic from beginning to end. But professionally, I went into graphic design because I was like, that's like the responsible thing to do.
Yeah.
So my background is mostly in graphic design. That's like what I've been working in for about like 10 to 11 years. But on the side, I was always working on my comics. So I started St. Catherine actually as a web comic. and I was posting it online for a couple of years. And then I had an editor reach out to me and she was interested in it and I pitched it and then it got picked up to be published, which was wild and so exciting. But that was kind of my comics journey. So very new to the publishing world, but I feel like comics and writing stories has been with me throughout my entire life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I very much relate to like that personal nature of either your storytelling or your art in general. Like
Yeah.
it's a very personal thing to create something and then put it out there. So I relate to that feeling so much.
It's weird because all of a sudden I was always, I remember I had this little like plastic box that
Mhm.
I had my dad make a lock for that I would put all my drawings in and stories. And I would never share those with people that I knew. Like I would sometimes share it with people online. So it is the cognitive dissonance of like sh my parents and like coworkers, like people on the marketing team where I work, like know about my book is really weird. But it is really cool too as well.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And St. Catherine in particular, it feels a little bit like a personal story. So, do you want to talk a little bit about the this is kind of like my broad question that we can just kind of jump off from, but general inspiration points for the story?
Yeah, so I would definitely say, back to what I was saying about when I was younger, and I think I loved the fantastical, and I grew up in a really I also grew up in a very strict Catholic family, very Irish American. And I always joke that like we were like, really intensely Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school and Catholic high school. And me and my siblings always joke that like we were known as the Catholic kids, like at the Catholic school. Like nobody there was like took it that seriously, but like we took it really seriously. And a lot of the media that I was able to consume when I was little was like very heavily monitored, but I just naturally loved the fantastical and I loved yeah, I loved anything that felt magical. And so I found that within Catholicism, the saints, demons, angels, like all that mythology was really interesting to me. So I became very fascinated with the saints and demons and angels, and it turned into me wanting to write stories about those, but in my own way. And I maybe like when I was in my early 20s, I had this idea for a demonic possession story, but not like the typical The Exorcist or Exorcism of Emily Rose that we see that are very like body horror or dark or classic horror. I thought the idea of someone who's possessed by a demon, but like they still have to go to work or they still have
Yeah.
to like be in their friend's wedding. Just going throughout your day-to-day life, I just thought was funny and interesting. And so I played around just visually with that, but I didn't have a point of view for it. I didn't really know like what the point of that concept was. And it was just one day where I was just laying awake in bed and having like, when you're trying to fall asleep, but you can't because you're anxious. And
Yes.
I was just like tallying up the bad things I've done in my life. And I realized it felt really intense to me. And I found myself getting really scared. And I was like, why am I so scared right now? And I realized like my upbringing of learning about heaven and hell and this sort of extreme reward punishment system, like eternal salvation and eternal damnation, was still kind of like ingrained in me. And that was where it clicked. All of a sudden, exploring this like funny demonic story, but exploring like religious indoctrination through it, like that was like, okay, that's like fun, like that's interesting to write. And so I put those two things together and I pulled a lot from my upbringing and just my own experience with religious indoctrination. And I have a lot of like my thoughts around the Catholic Church, like I'm very conflicted about it. But it was really fun to explore that through this like funny demonic possession story.
Yeah, no, it's really funny that you mentioned that. Like, I was the same. I went to Catholic school from
Yeah.
pre-K all the way to 12, and my
Oh,
mom
yeah.
also
Mhm.
taught at the school that I went to, the high school that I went to.
What does
But
she teach?
oh, she taught math. She taught,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I had her twice as a teacher, which was something. But it was kind of the inverse for me, like my family was not super, super devout. It was like, yeah, we'll go to church whenever we can, kind of like, whatever. But the social circle within my school and like, because my mom was friends with all these teachers and stuff, like, and then they knew me, it
Yeah.
felt very intense, like the culture of Catholicism and like having to maintain or uphold, like what you're being taught every day. And it led to like just a lot of guilt for like the smallest things. And it's
Hmm.
something that I still deal with, like with very mundane things. Like even though I don't really practice Catholic, like I wouldn't even consider myself Catholic anymore because I haven't gone to church since I can't tell you how long. But
Hmm.
that guilt just like lives with you. And that's what I think the really interesting thing that you did with this novel is you gave it a shape.
Hmm.
Like you gave it an image and the same thing that you talked about, like whenever you're laying awake at night, you're thinking back on all those things. I've so been there. I live there. I
Yeah.
totally get that.
Yeah.
How did you land on the shape of this? Like for the demons or the, Legion of Demons, I guess I should say, in St. Catherine, like because it's a graphic novel, it's visual. So how did you land on what they would look like?
Yeah, and it's one of the things I love about graphic novels and I love about visual storytelling. Any form of a story like has its like really great elements that you can take advantage of. And I do love in graphic novels how you can visualize things and really play with concepts. For me, the design I landed on for the demon, and he has kind of this like blobby black shape and this singular eye, and it really morphs and changes, throughout the course of the story. And for me, the sort of the like inky, blobby nature of it. One, I think it just visually is interesting and it's nice to add like a lot of contrast. A lot of the book is these very muted tones. And so having this really stark, like ink black character creates a nice contrast. But also the fact that it morphs and it moves and it's very blobby essentially. You can really play with how it plays in with a person's emotions, and you can have it small at points in time. You can have it grow as it becomes like more menacing. And there's just a lot of fun ways to help support your narrative through that visual. I think also too the decision to make like him just have this one big eye to me feels very representative of this like omniscient thing that knows everything. I think in Catholicism and in a lot of Christian religions, there's this idea of like there's an entity, be it God, the devil, whatever it may be, that always knows not just what you're doing, but what you have done, what you will do, and like what you're thinking. And so it really is like this. I know people have talked about this a lot on social media, but the idea of a panopticon, like you're constantly being surveillanced. So I wanted to show that constant surveillance that comes with like the way that Catholicism is taught, especially to, I think, young kids.
Oh, for sure. And that definitely plays into like the idea of like guilt and like the way that, like you have created the demons or the Legion of Demons. They kind of grow and intensify, like you said, based on the situation. And there's like a fluidity to it, which I think is really interesting and it feels very representative of like the day-to-day functioning of like kind of wrestling with your relationship with faith or like it doesn't necessarily have to be Catholicism, but with like what you believe in. And I think it was really, really interesting how it changed shape and size. And I really, like you mentioned, I really like that you had your characters handle day-to-day things like going to work, being in your friend's wedding. Like that to me, that feels very authentic and realistic to what people wrestle with?
Yeah, and obviously this book is about Catholicism. Like it really hits you over the head with it. Like I'm not being too coy about it. But I did want it to not be I didn't want like if you didn't understand Catholicism, I didn't want you to feel left out. And that's the tricky thing of balancing how do you make something that's relatable to the people that understand, like that little wink but also don't alienate the rest of your audience. And I think the guilt and shame and anxiety is something that we all experience. It's not something that is just unique to people who are raised religious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have kind of a general, more of a general question for you. You're the first graphic novelist that I believe that I've interviewed.
Oh.
So, you've kind of mentioned how your relationship with storytelling and art is very entwined with one another, right? So, how does the process look like for creating a graphic novel like this? Like, did you have the image come first? Did you think of the story first? Like, how does that play out into creating this, eventual whole book that tells a story?
Yeah, I think, and here's the thing is everyone's different. Every graphic novelist, comic artist is different. And so they'll all tell you something different. I think something that's really common though, or at least how I do it, is when I'm first thinking of a story, I'm in tandem, I'm writing things down, I'm like imagining in my mind, I'm writing down little notes, and I'm also drawing little sketches that are just really rough as I'm trying to form the story. Then once like the story starts to fully crystallize in my brain and some of the notes and sketches come together, we then start moving into like, okay, let's make this a real thing. And the typical process, especially if you go through publishing, again, if you're doing it on your own, everyone does it differently. Some people write as they draw, some people write everything and then add the drawings. The way that publishing expects you to do it, and also how I do it as well, is you first write an outline, and then from there you write a script. And the thing about graphic novels is they're acquired and sold on pitch. So different than like a prose book, typically
Hmm.
you pitch with like a full finished manuscript. So the publisher who's thinking to acquire it can read like the entire thing. Whereas graphic novels are very labor intensive, they take a really long time to make. And so the publisher knows that. And so they're like, we just want to know what you're thinking, give us an idea, tell us what happens from beginning, middle to end. We'll decide if we want to work with you, and then we'll start this process. And that process being outline, and then script, and you do notes, feedback with your editor on the outline and the script. And then from there, you move into something called thumbnails. And thumbnails are essentially like small, rough sketches of the pages. And again, this is just to make sure, like, because you don't want to have to be redrawing entire pages,
Yeah.
this is a way that the editor can make changes to the story. We can look at the flow of it, make sure that, like, okay, like, do we need a quiet moment here? Do we need things to pick up? Do we need things to slow down? Am I going to understand what's happening in this scene visually? You can fix all of that in thumbnails, which is really quick. It's kind of similar to like in film when people do storyboards before
Yeah.
actually shooting the entire film. And then you do something called pencils, which are the like drawing, and then you do inks where you do the actual like inks of the drawing over top, and then you do colors, and then you do lettering, the type, and then you have the final graphic novel. So that's the standard process and actually pretty similar to how I do it. The one thing I will say is a lot of times I will edit as I'm drawing. And even like I look at my thumbnails and I look at my pencils even and the final piece, and there are some scenes that I added, some things I took out. And that's what I kind of like about graphic novels is you can still like always be like changing little things. Not too much because, depending on who your editor or publisher is, they might not like that. I feel like my editor was pretty chill with me, like being like, "Hey, I want to like completely change the scene or add something new." But yeah, that's essentially the process of making a graphic novel.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I really like the idea of, visually being able to tweak things. Like if you don't feel like, hey, I have like a stronger visual for this scene and I think we need to maybe put it here or emphasize this more or less. Was there a lot of editing that you felt like you did with St. Catherine, or do you feel like it was pretty fully formed for you beginning to end?
Like with the story or the visuals as well.
Kind of both. Like whenever you were just going through the process, like did you feel like it was like, oh, this stuck out to me and I needed to put this in, or, like was there any like really key moments like that for you?
Yeah, I think there's one scene, I think overall the general story that I had in mind is pretty similar from
Hmm.
when I first started writing this to what it ended. It's more like in the small moments and the details that have really changed. Like I feel like the ending and things like that I had pretty clear in my mind, like from the beginning. There's one scene where my main character, Catherine, when she's home with her family, she goes to church with them. And that was a scene I think I added. in at the inks phase. I
Hmm.
like emailed my editor and was like, I need to add in this scene. And I really like how that scene, because it showed kind of this like home life. And again, it showed like a Catholic mass, which I do think is important if you
Yeah.
don't understand like what a Catholic mass looks like. It was kind of nice to add that in. But yeah, like there were little things that changed and bigger things like adding in a whole scene.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And one of my favorite things, like speaking of the little things that really work well in this novel, I love Catherine's roommate who does her podcast about the fantastical. And I
Yeah.
love that you have like the X-Files I Want to Believe poster hanging
Yeah.
in their
I think it's
apartment.
specifically it's like I want to leave. It's the
Yeah,
like
it is.
that
Yeah.
version of it. Yeah.
It was. No, I thought that that was just such a cool detail and all of those things. And, like speaking about how you always have been interested in the fantastical and things like that and how it relates, I think that the marriage of the two in this novel is really, really like it's just very cohesive. What would you say maybe were some of like your inspiration points, like outside of religion for like the fantastical? Like, were you an X-Files fan? Were you like, like those kinds of things?
Yeah, I did. Exiles was something I watched, I think when I was a little older, when I was in my early 20s. I didn't watch when I was younger because again, everything was very heavily
Yeah.
modern. And I feel like that was not, there's this, my mom really, she doesn't like horror. She doesn't like scary things. There's a line that is a very my mom quote that made it into the book, which is one of the characters says, real life is scary enough. And like my mom would
Yeah.
say this all the time. But I would say a lot of my influence was I did read a lot of comic books when I was little. So when I would go to the library, a lot of my siblings really loved like, reading prose books, but I was really drawn to the comics. And so I read a lot of like Spider-Man and Daredevil, and there in Spider-Man there's this character Venom, which is like this symbiote alien that like possesses its host, and that was definitely a huge influence. And even just like, and it depends on with comic books, like you have different writers all the time, and every writer is going to interpret that character differently. But I always liked sometimes some people interpreted this character Venom to be a little like snarky, kind of have this like tongue in cheek. Also, like the banter that he would have with Spider-Man, I always thought was really fun. And then when I went from American comics to manga, and I feel like manga has that very like supernatural, fantastical vibe to it as well. So yeah, I would say comics and manga were definitely like a huge influence in on this story.
Yeah, now that you point out the venom, I can kind of see how it
Yeah.
how it, influenced your shape of the demons in the story and things like that, kind of in their style and some of the banter, because it was a little funny, some of the back and forth that is had in St. Catherine. So
I,
I know you
I
said
always like one thing I'll say is I always like to say this story is like if Venom meets Ladybird is kind of like
Oh,
that's
that's
what the story
perfect.
is. Yeah,
Oh.
I know.
That's such a good comp. Oh, I love Lady Bird so much. I haven't watched it in a long time. Now I feel the need to rewatch it. Um, so I know that you mentioned that your mom is not a big fan of horror, but what is your relationship with horror like?
Yeah, and again, like it is funny because growing up, I didn't watch a lot of horror, but sometimes I would like accidentally see horror movies, when I'd be like downstairs in the basement and I remember seeing, it was this one movie called Cat's Eye, and it
Mhm.
had Drew Barrymore in it, and it was about, and I was like a kid, and I was like, oh, this is about a cat. I love cats, and it turned out to be a horror movie about this like little troll that was trying to like suck the life. I think it's a Stephen King,
I think it is
original
too. Yeah.
story. Yeah, and it was so scary to me, and I was like, I shared a room with my sister, and we had to like sleep with the lights on, all night, which it's okay because we traded off because she watched Beetlejuice and then she was scared, so we had to sleep with the lights on for her. So, it all balanced out. But I think the one thing I will say is even though I wasn't used to watching horror and I wasn't used to watching horror, and when I would see it, it would affect me. I was still very drawn to it. There's something about the creepy. And again, it's a lot of times horror is like it's a little fantastical, even if it is grounded in reality. And again, going back to like how I was raised, so many of the stories I would learn about the saints were like really scary.
Yeah.
And there was we would watch all the time this animated movie about Our Lady of Fatima, which is
Mhm.
about these like three Portuguese children who saw like a vision of Mary and these miracles that happen. And in this animated movie, it was really scary because they would talk about like boiling these children, and it was really like me and my siblings were all really scared by it. But I think sometimes, even though you're scared, you're like very drawn to it. So. I think for me, the way I like to approach horror and the horror I like is a more whimsical horror, a more fantastical horror. Um, because I think I just didn't grow up with really intense horror, so I kind of like something that is scary and is a little weird and like you can't look away from it, but it's like it's more fantastical than I would say like traditional like gory horror.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, now that you're saying it, I remember specifically in elementary school for All Saints Day. We did
Yeah.
I'm sure that y'all probably did this too, but they did the thing
Oh
where you
yeah.
picked a saint and you had to dress up and you
Hmm.
like had to do like a research project on them. And I remember my middle name's Rose, so I think I picked Saint Rose, and I could completely be misremembering this. This was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But I think I had read like she had laid on a bed of glass and bled out and like
Yeah.
suffered for all this time. And like looking back on that, having taken that in as a child and be like, yes, let me dress up as this lady who, bled to death on a concrete table. It's
No,
kind of
it's
horrific
wild.
looking back on it.
It is this funny thing of like, again, I think a lot of times in religious families, like, they're very careful about the media you consume. Like we could not read Harry Potter. Like that was, not some like very against that and like other types of stories like that. But yeah, I was learning about these saints and I was this little girl learning about like really horrendous things like and it is funny All Saints Day because that is a very like we did that too where you had to
Mhm.
dress up as a saint and like learn about them and it's just like kind of funny thinking about like a little kid being like and Saint Bartholomew was skinned alive and had to wear his skin as like you know but but I think because it's like it's all for the purpose of the faith and it's so imbued in the culture, it's seen as normal, which I just think
Oh,
is interesting.
it's totally normalized. And like if I'm not mistaken, like we had to write our little report and then we had to present it. So like we literally had children get
Yeah,
up and be like, yeah, I'm so and so. I was crucified upside down. Like, and that was normal. That was so normalized. And especially like, with Lent and the way of the cross, we did that every Friday.
yeah.
And in particular, I mean, like we had a pretty gnarly crucifix like on our altar. I don't,
Oh
like
yeah,
I've seen some very frightening ones, like truly.
yeah. You
Um,
could go up and like kiss the little bloody feet and all this
yeah.
like that.
Yeah. It's like it's really no wonder to me because I was not somebody who was into horror as a younger person. I
Yeah,
was, like I mean like I like Goosebumps and stuff like that. Like that was cool. But I didn't get into horror until I was like in my 20s. And now like it's all I read pretty much. And I'm like it's really no wonder that I'm into it looking
yeah.
back on like what I was exposed to as a child. Like it's really no mystery.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but moving away a little bit from the horrors of Catholicism and graphic nature of some of the things that we learn there.
Mhm.
So in general, I kind of want to return a little bit more specifically to Saint Catherine. Like we talked about, it seems like a little bit like a personal story for you, kind of wrestling and unpacking some of your feelings with religion and faith.
Mhm.
What was the writing experience for you in writing it? Because I know for me, like, and I'm sure readers who read it and identify, it's such a relief, for me to be like, oh, I'm not alone in this, because you relate and you identify. But what is it like sitting on the other side of the table whenever you're writing something like this?
Yeah. I think for me again, like I loved the process of doing it and I really enjoyed it. I love telling stories. I love creating characters. And, my main focus was to create these characters that felt very real. Um, and when I like putting in my own feelings and emotions and experience with like Catholic guilt and all those things, I wanted it to be about that, but I never wanted to like lose sight of these characters and who they are, right? Um, and so for me, it was like a pretty intense experience, but it did feel very cathartic. And I think also too, like this is, even though like a lot of it is inspired by my own experience, like it's totally a fictional story.
Yeah.
Like none of these characters are real. They're very real to me, like in my
Yeah.
own head and things like that. Um, but I think maybe the fact that like they felt like I was telling this fictional story was I was able to balance like that cathartic feeling of writing something that I feel like I've gone through, but also like it feels fantastical, it feels different. So there's like a balance there. But yeah, it was a nice feeling. And it is nice to see people's reaction to it and feel like they relate to it as well. Like it's just this nice communal experience. And it's fun to talk to people about it too. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like a lot of what, even talking about like the fantastical, it doesn't necessarily have to be horror, but anytime, like you're writing fiction or like telling stories that kind of confront these bigger topics or these like more personal topics, because faith is something that is very personal. It's always difficult to be vulnerable, but I think it's like one of those things that we need like as a community to like connect on, because it's such a big topic, and if we don't talk about it, then we kind of still live in shame, and then we're much like in your book, we're feeding the demon of all these other things.
Yeah, and speaking of like shame and guilt, like for me, again, it's very obviously a personal story and a lot of my own upbringing is in it. And I think a lot of how, my family reacts to it, specifically like, my parents who, yeah, I've told them many times, I'm like, this is fiction. It's not about you. And my mom's like, but it is. And and there is a balance. There is, I will say, like there is some truth to that, in that there are a lot of ways that the character of the mother is not like my mom, in a lot of ways. Like I think my mom is much funnier and weirder, like in the kindest way, and than the mother in this book. But also there's a lot of, my mom is such like, she's such a character, and there's so many like incredible things about her that did find their way into this story. And there is this level of like, I feel this guilt and shame around that, because I don't want it to seem like I'm like putting her on blast, or I'm being like, this is my mom,
Oh
like this
yeah.
is Edith Meyer right here. And because again, it's not. But I do think that, and she has not read it in full yet. She's read parts of it, but I am excited for her to read it, because I think she's expecting the worst, and I'm hoping that she's pleasantly surprised by it, because I really tried to approach it with a level of subtlety and understanding. From again, like I want, these characters are very real for me, and I try to think about, when I'm writing them, I try to not think about using them as like a vessel for like me trying to, I don't know, like a vessel to get some sort of agenda across, which
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
does is real, and like I'm definitely trying to say something with this story. But I also try to be like, well, who are these characters? Like, how is this story affecting them as well? So yeah, but we'll see. But that's the thing, like you put a story out there in the world, and it's vulnerable, it's
Yeah.
weird. Um, but I wouldn't give it up for anything, because I love doing it.
No, I totally understand. And there's a couple of things I want to hit on, like if I ever do anything creatively, like, write anything creatively, I worry about the same things about, what
Right.
my family or my friends will take away from if they see parts of themselves and whatever. But I think what we have to remember is like how many people do we run into on a day-to-day basis? Like how many people influence our day-to-day lives? And there are going to be pieces and parts of people that influence characters like that. Like you may have known like a friend's mom to be like that. And yeah, there are certain, like we all kind of pull from those things. And that's what I try and like remind myself. If I ever go to create anything, like this is an amalgamation of everything I've experienced. But, to the point of it being a little nerve-wracking and vulnerable, I totally, totally get it. But I think it is really exciting that you wrote the story the way that you did, because I think in particular with the parental figures in the story, it's all from a place of love. Everybody's doing the best of what they can, what they have, and if this is what they feel like is the loving, right thing to do by their child, then that's what they're going to do. And that doesn't take away sometimes from the damage it causes, but I think that there's a nuance to that and having that conversation, about guidance in that way.
For sure. And I think like with this story, the line I'm trying to toe is that obviously, like something like religion makes you want to be guilty and feel bad about yourself. And we're all human, we all mess up. It's a thing that happens. But you can't just like be carrying a cross or, just like feeling terrible and guilty about it constantly. Um, However, I don't think the alternative is to just be like, well, I'm going to go through life and do
Yeah.
have no guilt and shame. Like guilt and shame is like it's a human emotion, and I do think it is a good thing to a point. The problem is just when it gets thrown out of balance. And so what I'm really trying to explore in this story is like we don't need to hang ourselves up on a cross when we do
Yeah.
something bad, but also like there are consequences to our actions, and the best way is to try to find that middle ground and to acknowledge them and acknowledge how they've affected other people, um, and then try to move forward from that and not get stuck, but also not feel like you're completely absolved and you don't need to like ever feel bad or like
Yeah.
not change those patterns. So yeah, I tried to find that balance because it is a tricky balance. Um, because too, like morality and being good is really complicated. And I think what religion tries to give us is like a rubric and steps to it. And you can't always follow the steps. They try to tell you that you can, but it's really gray and it's really messy and there's a lot of in between. So that's a lot of what I try to explore in this.
No, I think that you definitely accomplished that. And it's very much an examination of like what is goodness to each character and like how do you navigate accomplishing the good without beating yourself up like you said, relentlessly. And I think it's a very graceful story. I think that you tell the story with a lot of grace and like a lot of kindness. There's one scene in particular, and I don't want to spoil it, but it kind of made me misty-eyed, and I'll tell you when we get done off camera.
Okay,
but
yeah,
uh but it was very emotional for me, and I just love this novel so much. And I'm
yeah.
really excited for it to be out in the world. But that wraps up about all of the questions that I had for you about the graphic novel. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on that I didn't bring up?
No, I feel like that's pretty good. I mean, like, of course, it's like you write a book and all you want to do is talk about spoilers, but we're going to wait until it's out there. And if anyone wants to talk to me about it, I would love to. But yeah, I think that was great.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And
Mhm.
just to kind of ask, like, are you working on anything else? Like, what's the rest of your year look like? I know, like you mentioned before we started recording, that you're going to be doing a few like book tour stops to launch the graphic novel. So, like, what does the rest of your year look like?
Yeah, so well, I'm doing an author talk and signing, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and so we're doing like a talk and signing. I'm originally from Cleveland, so I'm going to Cleveland in the end of May to talk about the book with a dear friend, librarian and cartoonist, and I'm going to Toronto to TCAF. TCAF is like a really incredible comics festival, so I'm really excited to go there. And yeah, and so I'm going to be talking about the book there. I am working on another book, which is really exciting. So that's a lot of what my year is going to be looking like too, is also working on that new story, which is fun.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting, and I'm gonna be staying tuned to see what that's about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if anybody is probably looking to keep up with you, I would just direct them to your social media accounts. I am super excited for you and super excited for the world to get their hands on this graphic novel. I think it's really important, kind of fosters really important conversations. And thank you so much again, Anna, for your time and answering all of my questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
Another huge thanks to Anna again for her time. If you can't tell, I'm absolutely obsessed with St. Catherine. I think it is a very visually stunning novel. I love the artwork that Anna created to tell this story, the physical shape of guilt and demons that she creates to tell this story, to kind of examine guilt, shame, tied to religion, tied to faith, however you decide to approach that. I think it's just a really cool story, and I really hope that you all enjoy it if you decide to pick it up. There are a lot of really cool books that are hitting shelves today. I believe Stephen Graham Jones's reissue of Mapping the Interior with Tor Nightfire hit shelves today on April 29th. Additionally, we have Chuck Wendig's Staircase in the Woods from Del Rey that should be releasing today. And then additionally, Polybius, don't know if I'm saying that correctly, by Colin Armstrong from Gallery Books is out today as well. So if you're a horror fan, there's plenty for you out there. Let me just say that. But yeah, I absolutely adore this graphic novel. If you really enjoyed American Rapture by CJ Lee, there's some shared DNA with these stories, so I highly recommend that you pick that up. But yeah, now to move on to upcoming business, I think I'm taking a break. Like I've kind of mentioned before in some of my outros, just life has been very, very hectic. And I think a break would be pretty good. I think that figuring out my lineup for the summer and going into the fall, a break would be really helpful to get organized and figure out what I want to do next with this podcast. So I'm not going anywhere. I will be back with more episodes about current horror and maybe even past horror because I'm really itching to read some older horror, some well acquainted horror. Maybe I can find some guests to chat with me about those books that I'm really interested in reading. So yeah, I'll probably be taking a few weeks off, probably the month of May, and then we'll return with a bang in June. I am excited to share that I will be going to StokerCon this year, which is a huge deal for me. I cannot express how excited I am for that. And I hope to get to meet some of you all in person and see you all there. In the meantime, I will still be doing my book reviews. I'll still be sharing what I'm reading on social media. So just keep up with me there. And yeah, that's where I'll post all my updates. So just stay tuned. And as always, thank you guys so much for sharing and doing all that you do. You all are truly the best. Until next time.